A lot is taking place. We're dab in the middle of the general elections. Yes, tomorrow will make it 3 weeks to April 20th. So a lot is taking place. It's hectic. A pace is going on. But in the midst of all of this, we need to clear a lot of things that are still not clear to the people of this country. Joining me at this time is a man who is no stranger to the Observer. Let me say a special good evening to Attorney at Law, Jagdeo Singh.
Good evening, sir, Mikey, and all your listeners.
Thank you so much. Master Control, put it up, please, because I want people to get a CEDAP expenditure breakdown. There you go. Look at those numbers. Look at it. And every time you see these numbers, it makes you try to, when you try to make some sort of logic as to why it is that a certain group of individuals, people who believe it's their God-given right to have everything, and why so much time people recuse themselves from cabinet, and in whose benefit. So here we are, Mr. Singh, 2015. Guide us through, please.
Well, you see, there are two ways of looking at this, right, Mikey? There is, CEDAP is the, first some context, CEDAP is the program by which government buys pharmaceuticals, which they distribute to the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago at no cost. These pharmaceuticals are then acquired from the agents for these pharmaceuticals, and the government pays them. So you have a number of firms who supply the CEDAP program and are paid by the government of Trinidad and Tobago. So between 2015 to 2024, a grand total of $4,433,746,594.83 was spent on CEDAP expenditure. What is alarming about an analysis of the figures is that between the period 2015 to 2024, 5 firms feature prominently. AA Lakis Limited, Allston's Marketing Limited, which is owned by the Ansa Makal Group, Anthony P. Scott Limited, Pharmaco Industries Limited, and Smith Robertson and Company Limited. Bear in mind that Smith Robertson and Anthony P. Scott are owned by the same group. Consistently over the period 2015 to 2024, these 5 companies have been awarded, have been paid, I should say, roughly 55, on average, 55.02% of the entire CEDAP expenditure. In 2015, these 5 firms were paid 59.38%. And I'm going to go down 15, 16 without calling the names. Next year, 50.56. Next year, 60.27. Next year, 55.63. 50.74, 56.91, 53.08, 53.51, 56.53, 55.22. So out of the total amount of CEDAP expenditure, which I outlined earlier, it's $4.4 billion and more, these 5 companies were paid $2.4 billion. In other words, they were paid 55.02% of the entire CEDAP expenditure. But when you subject the figures to a more granular analysis, you will see that one firm, Smith Robertson and Company, accounts for between 70 to 90% of the total payments to this group. And we haven't even featured in Anthony P. Scott Limited into that 70 to 90%, so that when you put that in, the figure goes up a little higher. Now, interestingly enough, and I have the documents, anybody's interested to see it, Mikey, I could send it to you. Mm-hmm. Anthony P. Scott and Company Limited was a struggling pharmaceutical distribution company. Struggling. They were barely doing up to $3 million in business with CEDAP up until 2019. That firm was then acquired by the same company that owns Smith Robertson Limited. The very year that firm was acquired, I think might have been 2020. Guess how much the revenue of Anthony P. Scott Limited and the payments, revenue stream alone from CEDAP jumped, Mikey. Make a guess. So you're struggling, you're doing $3 million in business.
Right.
Prior to acquisition. As soon as you're acquired by a firm that is perceived to be government friendly, guess how much your business jumps? Immediately, almost immediately.
More than 50%?
A shocking, astonishing, and extraordinary 300%. Their revenue stream goes from 3 million to 10 million almost immediately. You know the great Marcus Wolf? I don't know if you or your audience might be old enough to know who that is. Marcus Wolf was the legendary spy master of the legendary intelligence firm, the Stasi, out of East Germany. And he once famously said in his autobiography, in my line of work, there's no such thing as a coincidence. They do not exist. So, in the immortal words of Marcus Wolf, do you think that upon acquisition, the jump of 300% is a coincidence?
No.
So
let me understand this, Mr. Singh.
Yeah.
I want people to... No, you're talking about activities that have taken place where this company that was struggling has jumped to 300%.
300% in revenue.
In revenue. Now, what about those micro enterprises that had to close down because there was no Forex, access to Forex? What about the owner that had to leave the country
But
because...
quite apart from that,
all
Mikey,
of that.
what about, you see, and that's not the entire story of CEDAP, you know. Because what emerges when you subject the pharmaceutical industry to a level of granular and molecular and factual analysis, what emerges is a very grim picture of interference, of roadblocks, administrative and bureaucratic roadblocks being put in place to prevent importation of pharmaceuticals, whilst looking the other way and allowing everybody else to come in. You know, David Rudder had a song, The Madman's Rant, in which he said, somebody cutting down the weed real fast, and somebody letting the cocaine pass.
Yeah.
I'm not saying this, it is an allegory to show that administrators sometimes concentrate on one activity whilst allowing another to flourish under their very noses.
Yeah, but why can't there be equity across the board? Why?
Well, the only way an equity will come across the board in the administration of the pharmaceutical industry, and equity fairness will come to the pharmaceutical industry. I am convinced it's a change of government, Mikey, quite frankly. Because you see, there seem to be, a symbiosis, an administrative and economic symbiosis existing between some of these firms and the Ministry of Health and our officials there. I'm not so sure who it is.
Yeah, because Mr. Singh, look at this. I mean, this thing, you know, I don't know. I mean, this is how it seems to operate now, and stop me if I'm wrong.
But you see, I'll tell you something, Mike.
Yeah.
There's a level of murkiness
Of course.
in the ownership of some of these firms, because one of them, we are still doing some analysis. One of them has a local shareholder for a very small percentage of the shares. But the shares are then owned by an offshore company. The other shares are then owned by an offshore company, which we have not yet discovered the ownership of, but we will. The investigative arm of the UNC legal team will discover it. You can run, but you can't hide. We'll find you. So what has happened is that this $5 billion industry called CEDAP, okay, has been corralled by 5 firms who get 55%.
Right.
Of the allocature, of the expenditure of this program, of this government program. And I could send these figures to you, Mike, but you have them, right, Mikey? So you could distribute them. These are all backed by official figures issued by the government of Trinidad and Tobago pursuant to Freedom of Information request.
Yeah, we have them up on the screen. We have it up on the screen. But the thing about it, Mr. Singh, is that, again, this is not being done above board. What about the person who wants to bring in, whether it be supplements or whatever, and are being given a runaround?
And that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, but only for individuals to be checking the list and saying, we can't grant permission because one of our boys, one of the good old boys, is going to bring in something similar to this. And we don't want them competing with our people. Now, that in itself takes away all fairness. It takes away all practices that are deemed to be fair when dealing with these situations. I mean, what do we do? I mean, everything seems to be
let me tell you what to do. Do like the PSA. Recognize that the only government which represents fairness, equity, and transparency, the only government which will sit down and negotiate with you in good faith, is the United National Congress, a government led by Kamala Persad-Bissessar. The choice is clear. As I have said repeatedly, the country is on a political road to Damascus experience. It is either we go to Jerusalem and salvation, or we go the other way. This is our political road to Damascus. And that's the only way you're going to change the system. The system needs to be overhauled, and the system needs to be infused with a government which recognizes fairness and transparency and equity in the allocation and distribution of state resources.
I mean, okay. So you're saying that payments to these companies account for 55% of the grand total annually over the 10-year period?
Over the 10-year period, but within that, Smith Robertson and Company Limited. So out of that 55%, Mikey, 70 to 90% of that 55% is paid to Smith Robertson. So let me tell you the figures so that you could see. The 5 companies together would have received in payments $2,439,854,147.27. Okay? Smith Robertson, out of that $2.4 billion, would have been paid $1,837,403,458.38. And this does not include the $40 or $50 million so that would have been paid to Anthony P. Scott Limited. So let's break it down even further. Between 2015 to 2024, Smith Robertson, this one company, Mikey, from 2015 to 2024, let me tell you the percentage of CEDAP revenue this one company gets. 48.99%. And then we go on successive years. 16, 39.22, 17, 49.51, 18, 39.76, 19, 39.38, 2020, COVID, 42.38, 21, 39.08, 22, 37.82, 23, 38.75, and in 24, 42.05% of the entire CEDAP expenditure to one company, Smith Robertson and Company Limited. So for 9 years, they have made $1.9 billion, essentially. $200 million a year A little more than 200 million a year. One company.
One company.
Those figures are dumbfounding to an extent. Huh? It's extraordinary.
Now, people like yourself, we have to be grateful, like people like yourself, for highlighting this. I mean, and bringing it to the forefront. Is it fair to say that the Fair Trading Commission is nothing more than just a cosmetic figure?
Well, the Fair Trading Commission appears to be adopting the role of a toothless bulldog. The legislative framework is there, the power is there, the legislative power is there for them to do this. They made an announcement that they're going to do it, but the public has heard nothing since.
Yeah, you're right.
They have arrogated unto themselves the famous phrase used by Jules Bernard of being a toothless bulldog. Fair Trading Commission needs to step up.
And just to give some clarity to the people who are locked on, the Fair Trading Act and monopoly, the Fair Trading Act defines an enterprise as having monopoly power if it controls at least 40% of a particular market.
Well, I think these facts are very clear. These facts are very, very clear. And the Fair Trading Commission, they can call on you, Mikey, and I'm sure you will furnish them with the documents.
Like I said, it really and truly, I want to take a phrase from Dr. Rowley. It rots your gut when you look at what's taking place here. It's as if this group of individuals believe it's their God-given right to have everything. So what does that leave for the rest of us? What about the entrepreneurial
Mikey,
spirit?
you have to look at the importance of the sector, the industry you're dealing with here.
Yes.
This is pharmaceuticals. CEDAP concentrates on pharmaceuticals that are necessary for life preservation and people who suffer from chronic illnesses. This is not about optional pharmaceuticals. This is about necessary pharmaceuticals. So what has happened, an industry which caters to the most vulnerable sector of society, the aged and the infirm, has been kidnapped and strangled. A stranglehold has been placed on that industry by these companies, essentially.
Yeah, but Mr. Singh, we get a lot of complaints, especially from the people who rely on this CEDAP program. It seems as if once you get the medication from the CEDAP program, it's generic. But if you pay for that medicine, you get the original.
Yeah.
I mean, so the generic itself would have to cost less. So why such a markup where we have to be paying all this money?
Well, you see, that's the next sub-story in this evolving story. Whether or not, what were the pharmaceuticals that each one of these companies sold to the government? Whether they were generic or whether they were original drugs. And the markup sold to the government as opposed to the open market. That is the next sub-story in this story, which is going to be an evolving one.
Wow. Wow. Every Monday morning, something new.
Every Monday morning.
Every Monday morning. And yet still, you have businesses that simply cannot keep the lights on, cannot keep the doors
businesses
open.
that are closing, Mikey, because of two things. Because they cannot access the necessary forex to continue their business, and two, because of the bureaucratic roadblocks that are consistently being placed in the way of these businesses, so they cannot function. It is a $5 billion industry you're dealing with here, Mikey. And I have all the documents. 15 firms in Trinidad, $5 billion.
So when we hear that popular saying, there's no drugs in the hospital, I mean, what's causing the shortage?
How could there not be drugs and the government is paying $5 billion a year for pharmaceuticals?
Thank you.
Where is the pharmaceuticals going?
And of course, the fair
But
trading.
you see,
Go
Mikey,
ahead.
let me tell you something.
Please.
That's another story, yeah? Because CEDAP is a program by which the government pays for pharmaceuticals that citizens go to designated places and they collect their pharmaceuticals, okay?
Yeah.
So the evolving story is this. How much does each RHA, Regional Health Authority, which manages the hospitals under the Regional Health Authorities Act, which firms do these RHAs buy from? And how much is spent on pharmaceuticals in each RHA every year? That's the next FOI which we are going to send. And I guarantee you, this 5 billion over 10 years is going to be dwarfed. I guarantee you that, Mikey. So the 2 billion that Smith Robertson would have received from CEDAP alone, I guarantee you that is peanuts for what has been paid by the RHAs to these firms over the last 10 years.
Oh boy, Mr. Singh, I don't know. I mean, it really and truly, and we've also gotten.
You know,
that,
I'll tell you something. The last person I would want to attribute or quote anything that he has to say is Fitzgerald Hines. But he did use something once, albeit in an altogether erroneous context. But this pharmaceutical industry is the murky lagoon that he really was referring to. You want a murky lagoon? This is a murky lagoon, Mikey.
Yeah, we're also hearing that every month a senior government official makes a phone call to ensure that the payment is made to one of these companies.
Well, I've also heard that as well. I can't verify it, so I'm not going to go on the record to say who it is, but I've also heard that as well.
Yeah, somebody's looking out for these guys, boy. They have an economic angel.
I prefer to put it in somewhat more elegant terms. It's an economic symbiosis.
Yeah, I agree with you. Any closing comments, Mr. Singh?
No. My only closing comments are to remind the citizenry that April 28th is the day to wake up. As I said, we are at the crossroads. This is our political road to Damascus awakening. Either we choose the road to salvation and give ourselves a fighting chance to emerge out of the darkness that the PNM has imposed on us, or we allow this to continue same old, same old. Mikey, the question is not whether what the PNM going to do to make it better now, you know.
Yeah.
You know what the question is? How much worse can it get under a failed administration? That is the question. So as I leave you, I tell all your listeners and viewers, this is the political road to Damascus experience that we must have. This is our experience for deep, introspective, soul-searching decision-making. Are you willing to continue to give this PNM a chance? And that's what I leave you with. We need a leader. And we need a party with a demonstrated track record of competence and achievement, compassionate and caring government. A government that listens to the cries of the people and reaches out to touch the hands of the people who are crying out for help, for bread and justice. You know what I call the PNM? The Marie Antoinette of the Caribbean. The famous story of when the French, the poor, destitute and hungry French gathered outside the palace, and Marie Antoinette asked of her maid, "What are the people crying for?" They say, "We have no," and the maid replied, "We have no bread." And she insensitively said, "Well, let them eat cake." This is a Marie Antoinette government, Mikey.
Thank you so much. Well put.
Most welcome.
Well put. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, let them eat cake. I mean, really and truly, it makes you wonder. Put those figures up again for me, please, Master Control. Just one more time. Um, it really and truly makes you wonder. 41.44%. I mean, a true monopoly, a 10-year period. Thank you so much. You know, it really makes you wonder. I mean, from the cradle to the grave, apparently we don't stand a chance. From babies that may not make it out of the NICU, to murders on a daily basis, and to our senior citizens who are on a fixed income. A fixed income. But when it comes to CEDAP, everything is generic. But once you take out your money, oh, the original is there, then what are we paying for? What is it? I mean, what are these companies invoicing the government? And our taxpayers are going to these companies. Then what are we paying for? Are we getting value for our money? Of course not. By now you know that. We're not getting value for our money. But a government's role is to protect its citizens, the most vulnerable, babies, senior citizens, those who will want access to grants and what have you. That's what it's all about. But no. And you heard Attorney at Law Jagdeo Singh, let them eat cake. What do they care? As long as they can stuff their pockets, the pockets of their friends, their family and finances, they could care nothing more about us. They don't give a damn. Bottom line, it's a fact.